So our next presenter, which we have heard from Liz yesterday, and we've got her again today. So Liz Kington from the Malleefowl, WA Malleefowl Recovery Group, to talk to us about malleefowl in Western Australia. Where to from here? Put your hands together, please, for Liz.
Thank you. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Yamaji people on whose traditional lands this forum is taking place, and indeed all the Aboriginal lands on which the malleefowl still roams. I would like to spend some time today talking to you about WA. I am going to take off my national malleefowl recovery hat and put on the WA Malleefowl recovery hat, because I am currently playing in both roles, and there are some benefits for that. But if there are people in the room that want to step up into a community role for WA Malleefowl, we are always looking for you to join us and come and join the effort that's happening in WA. So a well-loved bird, as we're getting to hear about the malleefowl. A bit short. This talk is going to look at the conservation effort and the current status of the malleefowl in Western Australia. And I'm going to just start with a little bit of a plotted history about where we've come from. And at the end, I'm actually going to start posing some quite perhaps challenging questions for where to from here. So just to put some context and historical context to this, those of you who've been involved in malleefowl for some time will know that there was a very strong, prominent and large malleefowl preservation group from 1992, and in 2015 it stopped. Then at the same time, actually, the North Central Malleefowl Preservation Group, which would have covered not quite this area, but areas like Darwallinu, was set up. And again, 1993 to 2017. And also, I guess, a very strong group on doing monitoring work around the region. We've had the WA Malleefowl Network from 2007 and closed in 2017. The Katanning Forum that I mentioned yesterday was actually coordinated by the this group, and it sat under WWF, World Wildlife Fund. Then there was the Yonganal Malleefowl Centre, and you're going to hear next a talk from Stevie about the really good work that the Yonganal Malleefowl Centre. So 2007 it was set up, and it's still around. When it comes to us, the WA Malleefowl Recovery Group, we started only in 2017 and still going strong. So where have we come from? And I'm going to pick the Malleefowl Preservation Group just to set the scene on some of the really good work that's been happening over the years. Starting in 1992, the group was set up to preserve malleefowl in their natural habitat in WA. The group conducted all sorts of things: surveys, monitoring, nesting sites, looked at sources of funding, did research and awareness raising. They did an amazing schools program and support for membership base, which reached 600 people. So I've done a bit of a summary there. So starting in 1993, they put out a Malleefowl Matter newsletter regularly. They did school education. Their membership grew from 200 in 1995 to 600 in 1999. It's very impressive. Surveys of Foster Road, Karakarup, Yillaree, Tyline Road, Pennyup, Mount Jackson, Manangana, and Merredin Peak, all of which are monitoring sites that we still currently all visit today. And the Malleefowl Magic education program, reaching 160 schools. That's so impressive, by 2008. And also funding. They obtained funding to appoint an executive officer in 2013 and opened the Yonganal Malleefowl Centre in 2007. Unfortunately, they folded in 2015. in 2017, there was a decision by the North Central Malleefowl Preservation Group to fold as well, and to actually roll the remaining funds and I guess to come together with everyone and set up something new. So this is where the WA Malleefowl Recovery Group comes from, and this was a Zoom meeting that we had recently. I'd like to acknowledge the NAC small grants, because this behind this meeting is the new website that the WA group is setting up, and that was through a small grant fund made available. So at the bottom I've actually listed those that were not in the meeting, and so we've got Jessica in the room, Stevie's here, and Blair also in the group. So as you can see, there are a whole array of stakeholders in terms of, we've got just about every base covered, or nearly. We're still working on a bit more membership, which is where, if you're interested and a member of the community or member of an organisation, the WA group is actually a community organisation. So our objectives are quite broad, and I'm going to come back to this at the end. Promote conservation, promote retention and management of habitat, promote community awareness of the malleefowl and its need for protection through media schools and forums, and promote and implement the goals and objectives of the National Malleefowl Recovery Plan by supporting the management of monitoring, research activities and other conservation. Very broad objectives. Since 2017, we've actually, I guess, met some of those objectives. We do annual monitoring. We've started setting up the Malleefowl muster, and you heard a little bit about Kari's experience with Red Mort coming down to the muster last year. And at these events, we do training around the state as well. Coordination and looking at monitoring sites, whether we can increase the number. We do have to now obtain an annual scientific license. That will be the role for the WA group to obtain that, and monitoring kits, which we loan out to everyone so that we can get all monitoring done in the according to the national standards. Also state and RM grants we applied for. We tried for a couple of education grants and conservation planning, and unfortunately we were not successful so far with those. Just like to acknowledge that what the WA Malleefowl Recovery Group does isn't what's happening in WA. So you've just heard from NAC about their Now or Never program of revegetation fencing, and you're also going to hear later from Blair about the large-scale biodiversity program, and I believe over 180 hectares of land revegetated, which can link up malleefowl habitat across the state. Very important to acknowledge that there is obviously under National Land Care Program a whole suite of other investments in malleefowl, probably with nearly every region in WA. Comes as no surprise, obviously, the reason why we need these programs, and I just wanted to, I guess, put two maps together to state the obvious that we know, and Joe talked about a little yesterday, in terms of the reason why, the big reason why malleefowl conservation is so important, in that the land traditionally roamed by malleefowl, inhabited by malleefowl, is of course the same land that has been so largely cleared in WA. But as you can see, there are areas outside of those agricultural areas which are still, I guess, malleefowl habitat, and we do know that they are still in those areas. Nevertheless, we know that land clearing is still, I guess, continuing, and I just pulled up a graph to just look at the, I guess that there's obviously a lot of agricultural, forestry and horticultural clearing happening around the state. For utilities, interestingly, roads particularly will take out a lot of clearing. And of course, we know that the resource sector is clearing lands and obviously needing to apply for and receive approvals for that. So I guess there's still this ongoing threat from land clearing happening, and obviously the need for then recovery work in those areas. Just drawing on that, this is a site I'm going to tune into for just a little bit. If you can see, there is the square. So the square to the, just right in the middle, and I'll tune in. It is called Foster Road, and it's one of our monitoring sites. Interestingly, there are a few other areas around here which is starting to monitor as well. Just that one particular site is called Foster Road. Now, this was surveyed by the Malleefowl Preservation Group back in 1994, quite a long time ago. And again, it was surveyed again, and I'll just talk through a survey technique that we use. 28 mounds were found, and it was surveyed last year, just monitored last year, sorry. And one mound was found to be active. Now, through its history, it has had variable numbers of mounds, and I'll just point out also something that came up in a question: how many times do mounds get used? In terms of this particular site, mound number 14 has actually been active nearly every year since this time. Plotting out the number of active mounds, just as an observation of one particular small, and I picked this particular area because it was so isolated. As you can see, it's sitting in the middle of agricultural lands, and not necessarily indicative, but an interesting story. In 1994, the Foster Road survey was done, and the site was established and identified as one of the highest breeding density remnants in Australia. Now, every remnant is important, and it was a message that we were told quite clearly by Joe yesterday, in terms of all remnants where malleefowl inhabit are really important, but we are potentially seeing some changes to some remnants, and they're obviously in isolated areas. These remnants are showing, this particular one, showing changes in populations which are not encouraging. And this one, of course, last year, and had only one active mound. Some of the other things that we can do as a community group, and this was in partnership with the national team, is we can actually start looking at where malleefowl still roam. This was a bit of a call for, in partnership with the SWIC, to actually find out where we might find malleefowl, because we didn't know a lot of areas where they were still, they might still be in that region. And so this was a call, and actually this is where we can put out through, I guess, media, and actually try and get, I put out on radio for this. And interestingly, what came out of this very strongly was a malleefowl that kept crossing the road at Pallinup River. And it came up again and again. I'm thinking, actually, that's not where I'm trying to find out where these guys are. Nevertheless, that little bit of information was really good in then encouraging me to go down to that area and the area of Ravensthorpe. And we are now actually trying to look at setting up a whole new monitoring area down there, because we believe, as people know, they know where their malleefowl are crossing roads and where they see them. That is actually an area we actually should be monitoring and don't have a site. So some of the more modern ways of getting an understanding of where malleefowl still live is obviously LiDAR. You've heard a bit about this, and through the, I guess it's the popular way of finding out, and photogrammetry. But there are some more traditional ways, and the Malleefowl Preservation Group and the North Central Group knew how to do this really well. This particular experience was my first time, and I brought in the experienced people in the WA Malleefowl Group to show me how to do this. So we went out to a place called Jarring Nature Reserve and did a grid survey in 2020. You get everyone in a long line, and we covered 150 hectares, as you can see on the right. There are squiggly lines, and on the left is what we wanted to do. On the right is actually what we did do, walking through the bush with GPS, recording, having anchors at either end who were really tuning into those lines. As you can see from the middle, you have these anchors, and you have people in the middle who are looking for mounds. This is the traditional method. This is the method that engages our community. And as you can see, we had a really fun 2 days. We did it over a weekend. And this is the Badgebup Aboriginal group. And you can see us all lining up there. We found 7 inactive mounds in that survey, and we're still looking. We're still intending to actually encourage community groups, and this is a really, I guess, potentially important role for groups such as ranger groups and other community groups to actually get on country, check out the bush. It was lovely out there. There were orchids coming up, and we had everyone enjoyed themselves this day. Is actually one of the ways we can engage and actually find out more information. So in WA, Joe put up a whole suite of a map of the monitoring. This is again the same map where monitoring sites are in WA and across Australia. There's quite a few. There's 127 sites monitored every year. What I wanted to draw attention to was the massive citizen science effort that we are having in terms of our local understanding, getting people on ground, understanding the Malleefowl. Working in close partnership with the national group to ensure all mounds in 40 sites across WA are monitored each year. So just looking at the effort, the community effort, 2,158 hours were documented for all of our volunteers, and we register everyone as a DBCA volunteer, and actually that way we get some insurance cover for them, and they, I guess, get to sometimes get even at the end of the year a free pass for some of the parks because of their volunteer effort for Malleefowl. That's a reward for that. This is one of our groups, and this, yes, so this is the kind of thing we do, and I'm going to show you a very quick. Okay, so we go.
Active, not active. Are the sticks in place or not?
We get out our monitoring kit. This is what we did the other day at the field trip. And then we need a photograph, very important, of it. Checking out what's out there. We did this the other day at the Canna Mound. We're actually finding all the other evidence that comes around mounds, such as eggshell and prints. We saw a Malleefowl print there. And at the end, we leave a sticks in place. And there's Carl taking us to the next one. And that day we go home. As a result of all of that effort, as you've just shown, and all of those years of monitoring, I'm just going to show you some WA results from that. We have 4 regions. I'm presenting 4 regions here of data. This is the compiled data for, say, 20 years of monitoring in some cases. In this case, in the blue, you see that we have 8 sites. The more sites, as Joe said, the more confidence we have. So this is for the Northern Ag catchment area, and it looks like we've got a pretty stable population, and approximately, this is a crude estimate, 740 pairs potentially in the region. In the rangelands area, we've got more sites, and we've got a really variable population sort of, but a slightly trajectory slightly going up. So the dotted line is your trajectory. And this is based on 19 sites and showing that there are, in fact, approximately, according to our estimates, 3,478 pairs in the rangelands. In the wheat belt, there are approximately 15, so last year 15 sites being monitored, and a slight downward trend in the population. And as you can see, none of these, I guess the data is never complete for, and you can see over time that we do increase the number of monitoring sites. Approximately 1,030 pairs in the Avon. And in the South Coast, we have many fewer sites. So it's based only on 3. And we have a downward trajectory in this region, but there is based on a few areas only, which is in part, well, I guess makes the case why we need more monitoring sites in the South Region. 251 pairs estimated. And for WA, taking all that together, this is what the data is starting. This is what all that monitoring effort's starting to show, that there is, in fact, in WA, a slight downward trend in the population. 5,600 pairs, an estimate. I'm going to touch on this very quickly in terms of the WA community's role in the predator experiment, which you're hearing a lot about. So this is the adaptive management predator experiment, something I'm involved in, but in terms of the community's involvement, they do play a role in this one too. So this is about looking at the impact of fox baiting on the fox population and the impact of that on the malleefowl population. So it's actually looking at the efficacy, that's good, I can't say that, of the fox control and foxes and the whether foxes are the predator we think they are. And also in terms of that, we have a managed and an unmanaged area that we need to look at to make that comparison. One baited, one not baited, and quite close together. So we are setting up areas across Australia. You've seen this map yesterday. I just want to tune into the WA part. And really just to point out that setting this up involved partnerships across the whole environment sector. The Department of Biodiversity, Conservation Attractions, we have quite a few sites being managed by those, including Die Hardy, Karakarup and Pennyup, which includes South Coast NRM, Kalbarri, you've heard about just now, Lochada as well. Bush Heritage, very important partner to us, Red Mort, Uradi, Charles Darwin Reserve, all embraced as part of this big experiment. Private land, including Badger Station, the IPA Ningham Station with the Badamere Rangers engaged with the monitoring of that each year now. Mine sites, Mount Gibson Mine, Mount Jackson, which is, was Cliffs Mining at the time. Australian Wildlife Conservancy, the Mount Gibson Sanctuary, also not just about baited and unbaited, fenced and unfenced. So we can actually look at different kind of strategies within the adaptive management experiment and really try and understand that role of predators. So just some ways that we have used these opportunities in terms of that particular adaptive management. I'm going to tune into the South Coast now, to actually develop educational workshops. This is an annual malleefowl muster we're going to do, and this is at Yonganau. And this was I believe this was, we're trying to identify scats and where they'd come from. And quite a significant team that came along for that malleefowl muster and then subsequently came out, and this is the South Coast trio of sites that we're using in the adaptive management predator experiment. So Karakarup is in the middle there. In the top right, we've got Pennyup Reserve, and just below Karakarup, that square, is Red Mort. You've heard about Red Mort. This was a LiDAR work that we did, and Kari has done a good introduction for this. In terms of, we ground truthed this a couple of years ago, so you can see this is class 1 and class 2s. This turned out to be quite a phenomenal area in terms of like that Foster Road. I guess when they first came across it, they found it to be an incredibly populated reserve. Well, this is, I guess, the equivalent that we've just discovered. So in 2019, 13 mounds, there were only 44 mounds in this area. That's like 30%. Must say I hadn't come across. I went across over east and bragged about it, saying we've got this amazing reserve here. But that number has changed. So it just emphasizes the role of, I guess, community coming out to help year in, year out to actually monitor these areas, because in a short space of time, we have quite a difference occurring in these reserves. Be very interesting to see this year, after the rains we've had, what the situation is going to be with active mounds. And there's one of them. This is one of the most impressive I think I've ever seen. It was like 2 meters. It was, well, you can see it's a whole meter high. And this was at Red Mort. So malleefowl recovery work community engagement. And I just want to spend a little bit of the remaining time just raising some questions. I wanted to use this opportunity to perhaps have a conversation with you as our predominantly WA. Sorry, Brett, I'd love your input too. But I saw an opportunity here to actually start asking some questions, and I think we've got a panel session where we're going to perhaps explore this more. So what's the WA community role in all this? And I'll just throw up those objectives again. They are broad and they are inclusive and they cover a lot of things. I brought in the history because I want to make the point that we've done a cycle. This has been going on for 20 years and we are still doing a lot of the same things, and that's great. But I guess I just want to raise some issues that are emerging perhaps for me, and we'll see how much that is shared. So much clearing going on, and we have it as one of our objectives to promote and retain and manage habitat for malleefowl. How to promote and maintain habitat for malleefowl? How do we contain that land clearing issue? How do we get involved in that? Because to me, that's the big thing that is driving the need for recovery work. And there's so little investment as a result of what you saw being cleared almost on an annual basis in malleefowl and threatened species conservation. How do we address that? There's much recovery work on threatened species, and I alluded to the fact that a lot of where we get to with some threatened species is that we end up very focused. We're in a desperate need to contain, retain, and recover a population that's in trouble. And so we are focused obviously in action and area. We're not just, and so for the malleefowl, we are almost watching a slow decline in numbers for the bird, and no, we're not going to lose them overnight. They are spread over their whole range. So what is our role, community role, in conserving this situation? I guess that's just a bit of an open. And also, citizen scientists are available for malleefowl monitoring. I have just put out a call for people to join us for this year, and I have been really encouraged by the number of people who want to come and learn at our muster and join us to monitor. And I want to ride that wave for us as a community group. So I see it growing. I think COVID may have encouraged people to want to get out and do something in the bush. I hope that it's more than that. But coordination is actually a job, and there is a coordination of it, and I guess there's a need to define it at some point as a job. The volunteer work that we do is great, but burnout, as you can see from the old preservation groups, these groups do not necessarily survive in the long term. And there's a renewal, or there's a need to, I guess, create work for us to maintain a sustainable basis for this. So partnership with the national standards and the database is important to maintain. And so the question here is, what is the long-term viability and sustainable basis for community monitoring and a community group? And are we doing something useful? Thank you.
That's wonderful, Liz. I am listening, and it seems like there's this common message about the impact of clearing. And it reminded me last night, I was so happy when I returned home from Nakara to find that McGowan's his government has now stopped all logging of old growth forests, and I had a bit of a cry, because that was one of my big things when I was a child, it's actually one of the first things I studied was old growth forest, even though malleefowl's not in there. it's the start of change. And I think it's very important to recognise that what we're doing, whether it's citizen science, but also us out there and about. And it was great. Liz talked about the Badgebup Aboriginal Corporation, who Bush Heritage also work with, and just the work that we're doing together collectively to protect mallee fowl, but also find ways to really get those populations up too, huh?